There we go. Sorry about that, folks. Technical difficulties. Well, hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Tom McDermott, and I'll be taking you through this presentation today. As Mitch mentioned, I'm a key account. Originally, we were going to be co-presenting today with Anne Knipp, our VP of Presales Consulting. Very, very smart, very experienced person in this field. Unfortunately, she got called away. So we may be a little bit early in terms of when we finish, but worst case is we give you 10 to 15 minutes of your day back. So just want to let you know in terms of where I'm coming from and why I'm presenting to you today. For the last 8 years or so, I've been involved in innovation and collaboration and also change management. I've had different roles over that time, from sales to solution architecting to consulting as well as management. And I've been very fortunate to have worked with some really large organizations, some great companies over that time frame, both in terms of helping organizations just get started on their pathway through innovation and getting things going for the very first time, or also helping organizations with existing programs bring them to the next level of maturity. So again, I've been very fortunate in who I've worked with, but my background also extends past just innovation and collaboration. I have a background in psychology and still something I'm fairly passionate about. Oftentimes I sort of joke with people and let them know that when I got out of prison, I got into the software business. I was actually a psychotherapist in prison for a number of years, and it's been a very interesting experience because still when we think about innovation, it's not about crime, it's about human engagement and behavior, and very often these things are linked into how to help an organization change, how to move things along. And so today we'll be talking about that, and we have a number of things that we'll go through. Today is really about sort of best practice recommendations. We'll outline a few problems that you'll face along the way, and we'll also provide some recommendations for you in terms of how you can get through them. So who is this webinar for? This webinar is really geared towards people that are in the process of managing innovation programs, obviously, both from an idea collection perspective as well as execution. And I do highlight that first bullet, it could be different. I've experienced many organizations that have been tasked, have a team that's tasked with the collection of ideas, and then we'll hand off to a different team for the implementation and the execution of those ideas. And it is important to keep in mind that there's a big difference there. It's also geared towards those who need to cope with limited resources in the back end of innovation. This is where the implementation happens. This is where the project plans happen. This is where you're trying to align the ideas that you're collecting in campaigns or in the various forms in which you're collecting them, and then ultimately how they're implemented in the organization. And so we're also talking to people that have to handle a lot of ideas. When you stand a system like this up, you could get inundated with a large volume of content, and you need to be able to process through that and sort it out and organize it in the right way. We're talking for those who are just starting their innovation programs. We're going to be talking about problems that if you haven't faced them yet, you will. And it's a natural progression as the maturity of your program develops. And certainly for those who are managing ongoing innovation programs, I think that there's going to be some things in here that are going to be very relevant for you. And after the webinar, we're going to offer you a unique opportunity to share your insights. And we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. What I'd like to do is just take a quick poll of the audience, just to get a pulse in terms of where you are in your respective innovation journey. So I'm going to publish this poll here. And so right now you should be seeing a quick poll on your slide. You should be able to vote or check any one of those boxes or multiple boxes. And if you wouldn't mind just taking a moment to do that now, it would be very helpful for us just in terms of making sure we're delivering the right type of content. But we also look at this information down the line to see who our audiences are, who's attending these webinars, and ultimately in an attempt to better serve you in the future. While we are a software company, we do pride ourselves in the know-how that we have, and we like to share this openly because we believe that it's important to help grow and develop in the program. So we'll just give people a few more moments to vote. We've got about 2/3 of the audience that's voted so far. Okay, we're up to almost 90%. And we'll give you just about another 10 seconds. And then we'll share the results with you. And again, this is so you can see who else is on this call with us. We're not sharing names, but at least you can see where people are with respect to their innovation journeys. Okay, looks like we've got most people voted, so I'm going to close the poll right now. And I'm going to share it with you. So we can see that there's a lot of you that are tasked with both the collection of ideas as well as the execution of those ideas. That's actually good to hear. In many cases, organizations are doing those independently of each other, and that could certainly cause some friction points along the way, and a pretty even distribution otherwise. So this is great. We really appreciate you taking the time to answer our questions here. And again, the goal is to be able to provide the relevant content for you in the future and also help you with the issues that you're facing in your programs today. Okay, so let's take a look at some common problems that people are facing within this space. By this space, I'm talking about innovation management, idea collection, oftentimes very synonymous. So here are some examples of some common problems that I've seen personally over the last 8 years of working with organizations in this space. And again, I want to emphasize, not to scare you, but just to give you an adequate forewarning, that if you haven't seen these problems yet, more than likely you will. I really do feel that it's a natural progression of the maturity of the program. Nothing to worry about because all these things are certainly able to be addressed and overcome. But you just have to think about, do you have the time, the resources to try to figure these things out yourself? Typically that implies a lot of trial, a lot of error, and sometimes if you make mistakes early on in the program, it makes it very, very difficult to get the engagement that you want, the engagement that really fuels the biggest value that these programs add later on. And so, there's a lot of talk about engagement these days. There are a number of platforms and programs where I hear people wanting to engage for the sake of engagement, which is fine because you do need to get that momentum. You do need to get that critical mass. But without the right structure, it can oftentimes lead to people talking about things that are not particularly relevant to the task at hand, which I think is probably one of the biggest fears that people have when it comes to ideation or these socially oriented platforms, that people are not going to talk about work. They're going to talk about movies. They're going to put pictures of their pets up there. A lot of engagement, but it's not going to deliver a lot of value for you. And so when we talk about bridging the gap between the front end and the back end, that is one thing that we're taking into consideration. I'm not saying that is wrong because you do have to get people involved, but certainly there are ways to go about it in a way that's much more focused. I've also seen organizations that have run ideation campaigns and challenges, literally by the book. If there are, well, there are several books out there that can help you sort of structure your challenges. A number of organizations like ours that can help you do that as well. These folks have done great framing. They've asked the right types of questions. They've gotten their good ideas, but they still have a lapse in the visibility to the implementation and to the measuring of the return on their investment, the return on that engagement. So we'll talk about how to overcome that particular type of problem. And finally, for those that are not aligning the collection of ideas to strategic issues of the organization, this can lead to delayed implementation, especially without stakeholder engagement. And that takes me back to our poll question. For those of you that are fortunate to be both collecting ideas and managing their implementation, I think you're in a bit of an advantageous spot because there are groups and organizations that I've worked with that are tasked with the collection of ideas. They usually involve stakeholders to a certain extent. But there are still some that will collect ideas. They'll walk in. They'll try to share those ideas with a stakeholder. And if those ideas are not on target, if they're not on time, if they're not addressing the relevant problems that those people are facing, then nothing's going to happen with those. And that could lead to future problems as well. So nothing to be scared about. These are common things that happen. They happen all the time, and we've got some good suggestions to help overcome these problems. And let me share those with you too. So one thing, just to comment again on engagement for engagement's sake, there's been a lot of talk about this, especially in the social platforms. I was fortunate enough to attend Jive World a couple weeks ago out in Las Vegas. And Jive is a big social platform, and they even spoke about how in the early days they would try to use the platform to get engagement for the sake of engagement, but they realize more and more that people need to be able to quantify the value of what that engagement is bringing. So our best practice really is get started that way. Get people into the system. Make some exciting things available to people to participate in. But most importantly, you need to be able to focus on key strategic drivers. So even if your goal is to just get people engaged, try to make those outcomes actionable. Collect ideas that you can do something with or that you know there is an immediate need for those types of solutions. And again, focusing on those key strategic drivers is very, very important. And it's something that we'll talk about as we go through this presentation. So the importance of alignment. You know, I think this may be a little redundant for some of you that have been running programs for a while. For those of you that are just getting started, it's something that you absolutely need to keep in mind. The alignment of your program, that is, when you're collecting ideas, when you're engaging your crowd, whether it be internal employees or externals, being very clear about what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it, and what the role of the individual participant is and how important it is. And it may not be about just submitting an idea. There's a lot of people that submit ideas. You know, you get a lot of value from the collaborative iterations, from the channeling of the tacit knowledge that people have and they share when they're exposed to ideas that they haven't seen in a while. And so aligning this is going to help you in a number of different ways. Number one, it's going to lead to faster implementation. Because if you're collecting ideas around problems that are known problems, big problems in your organization, then the likelihood of those ideas getting traction and getting implemented is far, far greater than just collecting ideas from, say, a suggestion box type of program, which can work as well. Don't get me wrong. Those things can be very, very effective. But in terms of making sure that you're getting things that get implemented very quickly, I would say that alignment is one of the best practices. It'll lead to faster implementation. When that implementation happens, more people hear about it. What happens is a viral effect, and you get a lot more engagement in the system. And ultimately, channeled the right direction, the faster implementation, the higher levels of engagement, ultimately leads to more value that comes out of the system that you've invested, not just time in from a software perspective, but also the human resources that go into managing these programs and all the different internal resources that you need to help communicate effectively in your organization. Okay, next slide. There we go. So why to emphasize alignment? Why is this important? It may seem a little redundant again, but I just can't emphasize what a good best practice this really is. And there's a few things that are subtle, oftentimes overlooked, and you need to think about when you're running an ideation challenge or a campaign of some type, that you're going to have people with different skill sets involved in both the capturing of ideas as well as the implementation of those ideas. You're going to have people that are very, very good at creating those novel concepts that no one had ever thought about before. You're also going to have people that are not so good at creating the novel concept, but rather when they see someone else's idea, they build to it, they add it, they make associations, they make it stronger, they make it bigger, they make it better. And you're also going to have people in the system that are very much more task-oriented. It's not that they're not creative, but they channel that creative energy in terms of how they go about implementing their ideas, the to-do, if you will. And it's important to think about this because these people will approach problems differently based off of their perspective, based off of that creative energy. So as you keep that in mind, also spell out what are the clear indicators for success, telling people what you expect of them, how they can help you, how to use the system in an effective way. Those are really, really good best practices that oftentimes get overlooked. I think one of the biggest challenges that people have with social platforms, take a Yammer, for example, is that there may not be a clear indicator for how to use it, for what success looks like. And when that happens, you wind up getting a lot of noise. The same thing could happen in idea generation campaigns. So making sure that you've got a good governance model and clear indication for success, what success looks like, is very, very important. As I mentioned earlier, it's also going to help you with resource allocation to specific areas. If you're targeting on organizational objectives and in alignment with those, it's ultimately going to mean faster implementation for you, which is going to, again, create more engagement. It's going to create more buzz. It's going to add more value. And then finally, it's important to think about the finite number of projects in a given portfolio. It's not too hard to run an ideation campaign. You could get a lot of ideas about a lot of different things. However, there's only a finite resource that is running the projects in your organization. How many new ideas can these folks handle? Are there room to generate more projects? If not new projects, then maybe what you need to do is think about projects that are already underway and figure out a way to combine your challenge with those projects so that the project team is actually getting ideas that are very timely and very relevant for them specifically right now. Okay, and the effects of communicating alignment. These are things that I've seen many times over, and again, a lot of this is based off my personal experience over the past 8 years, and I've just had an opportunity to work with some great companies like many of yourselves on this line. So one thing that you may hear about, and this may be a little bit more of an American phrase versus something that would be more international. But we oftentimes hear about the flavor of the month. Innovation sometimes gets bucketed in this, oh, well, let's try this new innovation thing. Sometimes it's not seen as a serious initiative, and that typically happens because of the lapse of or the ineffective communication of the alignment of the program. Whenever you tie one of these programs back to your organizational goals, you'll find that the ideas that are generated don't get put on the proverbial back burner. That is, they maintain their importance because it is what people need right now. Ideally, this is going to tie back to some form of measurement, some form of return on investment. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it is important to think about how you measure these things. And I will say that it still surprises me that oftentimes there's organizations that are running these programs that haven't really thought about the success metrics that they're going to use. And I would say those are some of the things you need to think about before you even touch the software. Really think about what is going to demonstrate success. Because when you demonstrate success, you will drive more engagement across the program, across the enterprise, or across the extended enterprise, if you will, your customers, your partners, and your suppliers. I would also say that there's a term that I hear quite a bit, ubiquitous innovation. People want to make innovation as ubiquitous as people checking email. Well, how do you go about doing that? Oftentimes, when you think about innovation initiatives, if they're not seen as operationalized across the organization, people may be a little hesitant to participate. But if you can get people thinking about innovation all the time because they're doing it all the time, that is where you see some of those really powerful culture shifts begin to happen. And that will happen if what you're asking people to collaborate on in an ideation system is in direct alignment with the problems or projects that people are working on at the present time. So again, it's a new way of doing the same type of work that they'd be doing normally, but in a very highly collaborative and dynamic fashion. And also providing a clear understanding as to what my contribution is, making it very clear to the end user what's expected of them, what success looks like, what they can expect from you. And we'll talk about this in a little while too. Feedback mechanisms are some of the biggest challenges that people have, especially when you run these programs at scale. People want to get back to every single individual, but it's very time-consuming to do that on a manual basis. Having some sort of automated workflow or a series of them can be very, very beneficial to you. And ultimately, the effects of communicating alignment, we're going to ensure better implementation. The relevancy and the timing of the ideas you're collecting are better. The ideas are going to be within the current focus, and I think more importantly than anything else, the stakeholders that you're working with are going to be bought in to the process. They're going to have some influence. They're going to have some say. These are the ideas that they need, the problems that are, quote, keeping them up at night. So our recommendation is to use what we refer to in our system as strategic innovation areas. I often tell people this is the equivalent of the highest level of categorization that you would use as you're collecting ideas. Certainly one of those categories could be other. There are many organizations that still insist on and want to have a always open suggestion box type of thing without necessarily having the framing, and that's okay. As long as you're tying it back somehow, there's a way to map those ideas that you're collecting into the relevant areas of the business. You're giving directions even within the front-end approach and tying that back into what's important on the implementation side in the project management office. These directions will enable you to continue to measure the outcome, which again is very, very important. Your measurements, your success criteria may change over time, so it's important to make sure that whatever system you're using has enough flexibility to allow you to do that as well, and also generate reports, which is a big challenge for a lot of folks these days. And finally, it helps to allow allocation of resources and responsibilities to the dedicated areas that you're trying to serve through the collection of ideas in your program. Let me give you just a little bit of a view as to how Hype would help you organize these things. I'm not going to talk too much about our software specifically, but rather just how we represent the idea of strategic innovation areas. We like to make these visible to all the participants that are coming in. This happens to be framed off of a fictitious car company. And so you can see what those particular areas are. Each one of those is a link that you could drill into and get a little bit more information. Again, it's making it transparent. You're letting people know why you're doing this program, what areas they can immediately affect through their input, and then more importantly, you're measuring what you get from the system. That measurement is going to help you set goals. It's also going to help you course correct. So if you see that one thing is way exceeding and other things haven't even gotten off the ground yet, then you may want to think about retooling, about going back in and changing your approach to something that might be a little bit more effective. And having a tool, a software tool that allows you to do that is going to be very, very important. But also for those of you that think more in terms of the overall process, not so much the software, I would recommend that is something that you keep in mind as well. Now, where people look to identify these areas for these strategic innovation areas oftentimes has to do with growth of the organization. There's many ways to measure things. You know, there's the revenue increase or the growth of the company. There are bottom line considerations. How do we reduce our cost? There's softer metrics about engagement, for example. But it's amazing to me how many times I've sat in meetings with an organization and the team is about to run the program, they have a couple executive sponsors come in, and that alignment is just not there. And so you need to make sure that you're on the same page. Not everyone is running their idea generation innovation programs around specifically revenue generation or growth targets, but it is a great way to frame things up. People recognize the importance of it. The revenue growth gap is not a new formula by any means. We did not invent it, but just in terms of your forecasting, you know what you're going to get over the next few years in terms of your anticipated revenue. You know approximately the net present value of the new projects or the new products that you're going to be launching and where those would impact your pipeline. But we know that in order for you to make those targets, you're going to need a multiplier of 3 to 5x. And so where do you fill that gap? And we would offer up that innovation systems like Hype and many of our competitors are going to help you get there, because that gap is very difficult to close. And it's important that you have the right type of input going in there so that you get the right type of output at the end of the day. In terms of how to define these goals, I think it's fairly straightforward. This is not a rocket science type of formula. It may be varied based off of your particular needs and your particular organization, but certainly when you look at new products or perhaps adjacent markets or growing incremental growth on existing products or offering new services, these are all examples of how you can get to this objective. So ultimately what you're looking for is a question that only you are going to be able to answer, in terms of what is driving your program, what you're being measured on ultimately, and there's a lot of variance that goes around here. I don't think there is one right or wrong answer. We work with a lot of organizations and a lot of different parts within those organizations, and they oftentimes have very, very different objectives. And so from our perspective, or the Hype view, I should say, here's another view of one of our screens. And really it's not so much about the number of ideas, and you need to be careful about that. I've heard people ask about the average number of ideas. While mathematically you could arrive at such a number, it doesn't have a whole lot of meaning, and they would say in science that the answer is not even wrong. You're going to have a handful of people that are very, very prolific in extending their ideas and generating ideas, but if what you need is just a lot of ideas, well, it's not too hard to generate a lot of ideas. The challenge is generating a lot of ideas of quality and a lot of ideas of relevance. So when you tie this back to what the organization is trying to achieve, again, on that back end, where the implementation resources are going, then you could begin to put some more relevant targets here. So in our particular view, you set a financial target for each of these particular dimensions. You can see how many campaigns you've generated, tying back to each, how many ideas each campaign has generated, and from those ideas, how many concepts and projects have been launched, what their value is, and at what percentage of the target you're at. Very, very important metrics. The actual specific of the variables are going to differ based on your particular situation. But again, we would offer up that it's about the measuring of the quality of ideas, being able to quantify that whenever possible. That's really going to give you the most value to your innovation program. So let's talk a moment about visibility. Visibility can be a real challenge depending on your governance model. And by governance model, what I mean is, do you as the innovation team operate as sort of a centralized service? You work with all different parts of the organization. It may or may not have to do with the implementation of those ideas. Again, there's a lot of different models out there. There's not one that's right or wrong. It's really based on your organization. I've seen teams that collect ideas and then are responsible for their implementation. I've also seen teams that collect ideas on behalf of a part of the organization and hand those off. Likewise, innovation programs I've seen run business unit by business unit. And in many cases, with those governance models, people are using different systems. When you're using different systems, it can certainly impact visibility. It could impact the results. It could impact the feedback mechanisms. It could certainly influence the morale and engagement of the program. I know it's made it challenging for some of my clients to generate reports when they're using different systems. They collect ideas in one. They hand off their ideas to a project management office or a number of different disparate systems for the implementation of those ideas. And they do have a lot of challenges when it comes to reporting. So we really would recommend trying to integrate and tie these systems together as much as you can. And it's also not just about ideas. Projects, very rarely, it can happen. There are certainly exceptions to what I'm about to say, but very rarely will a project stem from just one person's idea. Often projects are the result of several collaborative iterations around someone's idea, with comments, with reviews, with taking ideas in different directions. There's also the idea that projects are going to emanate from concepts, which are several ideas that are put together in really more of a conceptual form, pre-project, but it's also bigger than an idea. And so, having the capability to be able to assess and measure these things is very important as well. When people talk about the front end of ideation, it typically stops with the generation of ideas, and here are your good ideas. Now what? Well, now comes the back end of innovation, where you're looking at the concepts and development of projects and matching those up against resources. It's important when you have disconnected systems to let participants know that their idea is part of something bigger. The marketing and internal communication that you use are going to be absolutely critical to this process as well. So again, we would make the suggestion that there are a lot of moving parts, and to make it clear to people not only what is expected of them, but also what is happening with their ideas based off of how your innovation program is governed and distributed in your organization. And there are certainly a lot of moving parts when it comes to visibility. Using many systems increases the complexity of reporting. Certainly it can be done, but there are also variables that can influence when you get ideas or not. There's a lot of human factors that go into this. There are politics. As much as you'd like to avoid these things, every organization has their internal politics, and if you hand over somebody a couple $1 million worth of ideas that save that amount of money, they may be concerned about what happens to their budget next year, so they may be reluctant in telling you what happens. There's also this concept of inattention, especially here in America, very ADD type of culture, and what was it I was going to say? Oh yeah, inattention, that's right. So people are given ideas, but because they don't align with their immediate projects, their immediate priorities, they get put to the side, and people tend to forget about them as they go through. So these are things to just keep in mind. Again, they could all be overcome. But when you look at systems that integrate, you're able to save time. You're boosting your participation, and you're also leveraging other technology investments. You're avoiding things like an extra username or password. There's certainly a lot of trending around convergence out there, and people are just tired of having all these different usernames and passwords. It becomes very, very difficult to manage them all. There's also the idea of a profile synchronization. Most organizations have several systems, and you may have profiles in each one. You might have a profile in your Active Directory system. You might have something on your SharePoint system. You might have another profile in your Ideation system. Many people in the U.S. are using LinkedIn as a source of their profiles. I was at a networking event not too long ago where somebody from LinkedIn was speaking, and they've got a lot of statistics in terms of how people are using their systems and where they're spending their time. And their statistic was more people are spending their time keeping their LinkedIn profile up to date than they do with their internal profiles. And that information can be very, very valuable, because within those profiles oftentimes you have people's skills and people's interests. What if you could appeal to those skills and interests when you're assigning the review of an idea, or you're engaging people to come in and offer up ideas? Very important things to think about. And then finally, being able to search the content. So if you're using a number of different systems, especially for the implementation of projects, for example, wouldn't it be great if you could go out and search through your entire database of ideas that you've collected, especially if you've been doing this for a while? You've got a lot of great content there. How do you search that? How do you reuse that knowledge? Having a system in place that will help you do that, especially a system that can communicate with those other systems, is very, very valuable. And the last thing I'll mention here, just in terms of a lot of moving parts, that there's often a very, very different type of discipline or different internal sort of corporate process that goes into the launch of an ideation challenge versus what you need to present to a committee or a steering committee to launch a formal project in an organization. formal projects, which are pulling people's time and resources off of a finite list, versus an ideation challenge. Not to say that there's an infinite resource for those as well, but you can certainly collect a lot more ideas than you have projects for or home for them to go to. And so, again, it's important. What if you apply the same rigor to how you launch an ideation challenge, to how you launch a formal project? Or I should say, can you even do that at this time? There are people that are just getting their programs launched. They're just getting started. They need to build that momentum. They need to advertise and sell this internally. And so you're going to be a lot more receptive to taking on challenges from an ideation perspective than you would in a comparable situation from a project management office. Likewise, there are more mature programs that I've worked with where they actually turn people away. You know, business sponsors come to them and they want to run an innovation program or an ideation session, collect ideas, and they're told no because they don't have the right resources, they don't have the right framing, they're not asking the right types of questions. So I would leave it up to the audience to decide, is this something that you can afford to do right now? I certainly would say it's a best practice down the line as you've been running these programs for a while. You really want to just take on those projects that you know are going to be important to generate ideas regarding, not just the softer things like the sort of an internal joke for folks that have been in this industry for a long time. You don't want to use this system to name conference rooms. You could. It would work. But at the same time, when people see that, it's not quite as charged as, you know, targeting a specific risk factor that's been outlined to Wall Street in your corporate report. So I mentioned that there's different types of ideas. There's different readiness levels. And really what we're referring to here is when we think about what comprises an idea, in many cases as I present a system like Hype for people for the very first time, I'll ask them to consider the word idea is almost like a variable. It's really more of an equation. An idea by itself is more of an idea fragment. It can be comprised of sparks or of insights. But ultimately that idea in and of itself, usually comprised of someone's idea, post, and then several comments that really begin to build this into more of a concept within the idea framing alone, let alone when you have several ideas, because then you're going to be building out concepts which can cluster these ideas. And maybe you may be required to do further research on the business case and implementation before any resources are assigned. And systems that deal just with the front end do not necessarily lend themselves to this type of approach. But this type of approach is absolutely critical when you think about how to get these ideas into their implementation phase and really help to close the gap between the front end and the back end. And finally, the innovation projects, to plan and to monitor the implementation process, to be able to feed back to the audience. And there's a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of social platforms, even Hype. We have activity streams. We make the communication as easy as possible. And so it's important to let people know what's going on. Now, it could be a bit of a challenge when you have longer product development time cycles, for example. It's difficult to tell someone that their idea has become a product, but there's still ways that you can address that over time. Now, as I was preparing this webinar, I was dealing with some of my European colleagues, and I was trying to convey the idea of a black hole, and not something that they had necessarily heard of, used synonymously in business jargon when it comes to ideation. But what I will say is that, especially here in the States, I hear this all the time, the black hole of ideas. There's several systems in use. It's nearly impossible to track and provide feedback to all the people that are submitting you these ideas, and so these ideas are swirled into the vortex of a black hole from which they never escape. No one knows what happens to them. The people that have shared their ideas with you wind up getting frustrated because they don't know what happens. And so being able to get ahead of this, to be proactive, to make sure that you have some sort of, for example, an automated email response to the submission of an idea, or a transparent system that allows people to see where their ideas sit, can be very, very important. It really helps to go a long way in terms of both alignment as well as engagement. As I mentioned earlier, when you have an open idea submission, I'm not talking about open innovation in the academic sense where you're going outside of your corporate walls, your organization. Many people refer to an open idea submission akin to a suggestion box. We want everybody from all parts of the business to be able to give an idea on whatever they want. Well, it's not a bad idea. It can be a little challenging to manage. Certainly the resources that go into that, it can be difficult. The way that you review those ideas can be difficult, but it's a very intuitive thing to want to do. Our recommendation, though, is, again, even when you have these open idea submissions, be able to categorize and bucket these ideas into areas of relevance and have a few different responses ready for people. So if an idea is way off the mark, not that it's a bad idea, but it's just not relevant at this time, have a soft message that goes out to the folks that submitted that idea to say, thank you very much for your contribution. We're not going to be looking at this idea right now, but please participate again. Just a little touch like that can go a long way in helping people feel that they've been acknowledged, that they've been listened to, and more importantly, that they're not submitting ideas into this proverbial black hole, but rather they're going in and they're going through a workflow. People are looking at these ideas. And it's also important about when you communicate back to the crowd that this is going on. So, I've worked with an organization where they did communicate back, but it was 8 months after the fact of collecting these ideas. Most of the time, idea challenges are going to last anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. And so if you wait several months, people remember that. They knew that they submitted an idea. It's been a long time since they heard anything. Try to work on a more immediate feedback mechanism, even if the ideas you're collecting are going into a more long-term project. It demonstrates alignment. It reinforces participation. You get a lot more engagement that way, and a lot more viral spread as well. When someone knows that their idea has been looked at, they're more likely to tell one of their colleagues that people are paying attention to the system. Likewise, if they think their idea has not been looked at, they're going to tell even more of their colleagues, don't waste their time. So it's a very tricky balance to walk, but again, with the proper planning and the right approach, these problems are definitely overcome. Okay. So again, in terms of our recommendations for you, what we would say is use an integrated system, or at least try to integrate as many systems as seamlessly as possible. So single sign-on, the porting over of profiles, the integration of search, being able to go from system to system, and more importantly from a reporting perspective, where are these ideas? How are they moving along? Are they moving along? Very, very important in the long term. We would also recommend that you differentiate between different readiness levels of ideas. Let people know that too. Are you collecting ideas? Are you collecting concepts? Are you collecting projects? We would recommend that you set specific goals for each of those. Typically when you're collecting ideas, if you're looking at a well-framed challenge, you're going to see a hit rate of quality ideas that you'd want to move forward at maybe 5 to 7%. So for every 100 ideas you get, 5 to 7 of those are going to become worthy of moving forward. So keep the end in mind as you start this out. And also think about how many projects that can be staffed right now. What are those resources? And how many concepts do they realistically handle in the assessment of taking those on board? And so thinking about this ahead of time is going to really help streamline the process. It's going to help the accuracy of your program in a lot of different ways. And then find reasons to communicate, even if the idea has not been implemented yet. That's okay. The fact that you're letting people know that you're doing something with their content, that they have a voice, that it matters, is critical, and it will take you very, very far. And then finally, communicate where ideas are in the process. This is a little example of how we do it at Hype. We have a very clear indicator for the end user so that they know exactly where their ideas are. They may not see how people are talking about the idea in the management review. That is usually something you want to keep for the subject matter experts. But the participants know where this idea is along the way. And so whether you're using Hype or you're using some other tool, coming up with a way to represent that to your audience, to your participants, is going to be very, very helpful in keeping engagement, in keeping repeat visitors coming back, and ultimately in keeping alignment to the program. So I have one more question for the audience as we round the corner here and get ready to begin wrapping up. And so I'd like to launch another poll. So for those of you that are checking email, if you'd be so kind as to tune back in. I'm going to open up another poll with you right now, and ultimately this is about how do you measure success? There's a lot of ways to do it. And I don't know that there's a wrong way or a right way. I think it's going to be really varied based on your organization, your immediate objectives, and your long-term objectives. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing with us, if you would, just how your organization is looking to measure the success of your innovation program, that would be great. And so we'll give you just a moment or two to input your ideas. I love these polls. You get a real good sense as to what issues people are facing. Very interesting results that I'm seeing coming through here too. We've got about 2/3 of the people that have voted so far. We'll give you just another say 15 seconds. Wow, this is excellent. Okay, so let me share these results with you. Here you go. So you can see from the participants of this particular webinar how people are measured on the success of their program and where you may fit into that. Metrics are a very, very hot topic. There's a wide variety of metrics to use. How you go about measuring things is going to be dependent on your organization. Again, if you're looking at employee engagement, customer engagement, that's fantastic because you do need to have that. How does that add value to the organization? Is it about revenue growth? Is it about customer retention? How does it translate into a true metric? I would love to hear from some of you on that. But it's very interesting to see that the majority of people are focused on revenue growth with cost reduction and employee engagement, a very close second. Well, exact tie for second place, followed by customer engagement and then some other metrics that are used as well. So really appreciate you folks sharing this information with us. Again, it's going to be very helpful for us to provide more timely content for you in the next series of webinars. And finally, as we wrap up here and get ready for Q&A, I will say that there's a lot of variance in terms of how metrics are done. It may be about money. It may be about time. It may be about softer metrics. There's also some things that I've seen in terms of people measuring how many projects or how many concepts stem from ideas. Again, I would caution against looking at the average number of ideas per person or just counting ideas because you could get a lot of ideas very quickly that have no merit. So, again, it's really about what those ideas are turning into. How actionable are they? I would suggest that may be another metric for some of you that are focused on the project side of things and how many ideas you're getting from those strategic innovation areas that then feed into your business. And then in conclusion, just a few things to leave you with, and then we'll go into the question and answer section. So strategic innovation areas will align the front end with the back end. It makes it clear what everybody's trying to achieve and how they're measured. Using integrated systems will greatly facilitate visibility. They'll also greatly facilitate reporting and make information easier for you to access. And then finally, starting with the success criteria or starting with the end in mind, as often said, specific metrics will vary and change over time. Make sure that you have a system that is robust and flexible enough to adapt and grow with you. How you measure success of your program in the early days is going to be a bit different than how you measure success of your program 2, 3, 4 years into it. So all very important things to think about. Now, as a result of this type of discussion, we're going to be inviting you to participate in a challenge that we've set up in our system called Hype Go. Hype Go is a lighter version of our enterprise software. It's quick, it's easy, and it's got a lot of best practices built into it, and you could use it for 1 week for free. You'll also be able to participate in this research for free. And what we're interested in doing is identifying what are some of the challenges and solutions that you have faced to building sustainable innovation programs. That's the URL right now. We're going to have a series of email invitations that go out to you specifically. And so if you're comfortable, please come and join us. Share what you've learned. Help other people like you that are just getting started to be able to get ahead of these problems, to solve these problems effectively. And if you've got some interesting solutions, we'd love to hear about them. And again, this is going to be helpful for everyone, for you all, in that it provides a mechanism of collaboration for people just like you in different industries, and certainly from the Hype research perspective to ensure that we're providing content that is the most relevant for what you need today. I think we do have a good pulse as to what our customers are going through, what they're experiencing. Not everyone on this line is a Hype customer. We'd love to hear from you too. And so with that, let us go into the question and answer section. As Mitch had advised, please use the mechanism in the GoToMeeting window bar, and you can submit a question. And once those questions are in, we will go through and answer them. Hopefully we'll be able to get to everyone's. So please, by all means, share the questions that you have. Okay. I've got one here. The question reads, how is it different between idea collection and implementation as per the governance model that you mentioned? Well, I did speak a little bit about this, so just to recap, I have experienced that there are parts of organizations that are tasked just with the collection of ideas. It may be a centralized service, it may be a repository for ideas, and many times these parts of the organization are not in alignment with stakeholders. There's a lot that you can do in terms of process outside of any given software platform to engage stakeholders, to make sure that the ideas that you're delivering are timely, that they're relevant, that they have resources for implementation. But if you are fortunate enough to be on a team that does both the idea collection as well as the implementation, then I think that you've got a little bit of advantage, because I would imagine that the connections are going to be a little bit more coherent. I've got a question here. Are centralized programs better than decentralized programs for ideation management? You know, I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer for that. I have seen both work very, very well. The biggest challenge is going to be the resources required in terms of managing those programs. So a centralized function is going to have a dedicated resource potentially, or it'll have resources that are on partial time commits, versus something that is somewhat decentralized. When you have a decentralized program, you can have people that are focused on different topical areas, which is fine. The question is, do they tie back into the overall objectives of the organization? And I would also ask, what are you doing in terms of making sure that best practices are disseminated in those decentralized units? And so we actually provide a training program that we do with our partner, innovationmanagement.se, which is one of many innovation training programs out there. I've also worked with organizations to help them build out internal challenge blueprints and playbooks, creating a center of excellence so that you're collecting best practices from your organization. And nobody knows the culture of your organization better than you do. And so, again, I would say the answer to that is probably going to be more similar to how do you deploy other software platforms? Is it a centralized solution, or is it done in different parts of the business? Again, I think either one could work very, very effectively. It's going to be based on how you manage things internally. Okay, any other questions? Okay, I've got another one here. This one's geared a little bit more towards product development time cycle. So how do you measure or how do you report back when a new product development time cycle could be 5 to 7 years? Well, that's a good point, and we see this a lot in life sciences and heavy manufacturing as well, that a lot of times it takes a long time to create these things. How do you let people know that their idea has been implemented? Typically, along the way of the creation of these products, that you're going to have a phase and gate type of methodology. Nothing wrong with letting people know that their ideas have made it into a certain part of that progression, that their ideas are being leveraged by one or more parts of the business. I think little touches like that go a long way in helping people to feel that they're a big part of the program. Another question that's just come in, does culture play a role? If so, how do you measure culture? Yes, culture absolutely plays a role. Some organizations are ready for very well-built, robust social platforms. Other organizations, much more conservative, much more reluctant to do that. We actually have a webinar based off of that. I would defer you to our webinar archive. My colleague Colin Nelson has done something very, very good about the culture of this. We also did a case study with Swisslog just recently that you can find available on our website as well. That'll help provide a little bit more depth into the cultural dynamics. It's a conversation and a topic that's worth 1 or 2 webinars in and of itself. It's also something that we provide workshops on should you be interested in engaging us for that service. Here's another question. We're beginning an innovation program. Any best practices for integrating innovation projects with current business plans that are already stretching resources? Yes, absolutely. Using an innovation program and focusing a challenge or a campaign, which is basically the collection of ideas in a finite time period, framing the challenge to those specific projects is going to be very, very helpful for you in a number of different ways. Number one, you're going to be delivering value to those folks that are running on those projects already. They may find that the ideas that you're submitting, assuming that you go through the right process of reviewing and ranking and prioritizing those ideas for their relevancy, are going to actually assist in the already constrained resources that they have. So it'll make things a little bit easier. You're going to be getting this fresh content, this new insight that's coming in. But especially relevant is in the beginning of your program. You do have to do a lot of internal selling. You do have to do a lot of internal marketing. And so when you frame your challenge or your campaign up against existing projects, you get a lot of really, really good traction that comes from there. Here's another good one. I mentioned that different metrics will be used at the beginning of a program and at the end. So revenue metrics cannot be used short-term until the program has worked for any given time. Any suggestions for recommended metric to be used from the very beginning? Yes, I would recommend a few different things. Again, it may not be about the money. It certainly, as they say, it's never about the money until there is money, and then it's all about the money. But when you're looking at starting this out in the beginning, think about maybe measuring how many ideas turn into potential projects or that feed into potential projects. That's a really good measure of success, of the efficacy of the program, that you're collecting ideas that projects team can use, that they're relevant, and that they're adding value. So yeah, it is a little bit different as you get started, but certainly there's a lot of things that you can do. Let's see. So there's one question here. I'm not completely sure I understand the whole nature of it, but have you seen Hype Innovation Express be used successfully for a campaign that is launched with Innovation Express and has worked in-person innovation workshops simultaneously? So yes, that's actually a great point. The in-person workshops are fantastic ways to engage people. Not everything happens on online asynchronous collaboration platforms. Sometimes you need that in-person, face-to-face touch. And so our tool Hype Go is actually great for that. We do have a mobile app for our enterprise system, which allows you to submit ideas through mobile devices. Hype Go is, there's no mobile app for that, but it looks great on a tablet, even on a smartphone. You're able to get in there and implement things. And so it's not so much the software at that point. It's really about creating some process outside of the software, where you would have a facilitator in the meeting who would say, you're delivering part of a presentation, you carve out 10 or 15 minutes for the collection of ideas or maybe for the review of ideas. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to just collect ideas of these things as well. You may need to use this in-person experiential to review those ideas, and you can set that up in a system as well. So it's a great insight, very good question, and it's certainly something that can be done whether using our system or a number of others. Okay, well, just being sensitive of the time, we're just about at the top of the hour. And so we'll give you a few minutes of your day back and give you enough time to get onto your next call or get to your next meeting, grab a coffee or something in between. I'd certainly like to express my gratitude to all of you for sticking with us for this time and for participating in our polls. Hopefully we'll see you in the Hype Go system where you can share some of your insights. But again, I'm very grateful for you sharing this time. And if there's anything that I can do, any information that I can provide for you, here's my LinkedIn profile, as I mentioned earlier. You should also have my email address from this presentation. I'd be more than happy to assist. Please consider me to be a resource for you at your disposal. So with that, I thank you all very much for your attention. I wish you the very best of luck in your innovation journeys. And again, if there's anything that we can do to make life easier for you to help you out, then by all means, just let us know. Mitch, is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Not really. Just as I mentioned, we'll send out a follow-up email containing the slides and an invite to the Hype Go campaign you just mentioned. And, well, thanks for your attention and hope to welcome you again soon. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.